I was very struck by the deeply ideological, bordering on fanatical language that was in his speech the other day. I think that hints at an emotion, a fervour in his mind that is far, far more than we've ever seen before.
Let's turn to James Heappey, the UK's Armed Forces Minister, who's also with us. Morning. James Heappey, can you hear me?
Good morning, I can.
Good morning. Apologies, gremlins in the system. Can I start, first of all, with reports we're hearing this morning about 28 nations, including the UK, agreeing to give more weapons and medical supplies and other aid to Ukraine. Can you tell us exactly what is going to be involved in that? And also, what is your understanding about how useful UK lethal aid has been to Ukraine so far?
Well, you're absolutely right. Ben Wallace, the Secretary of State, convened a meeting last night of 25 or so countries, all of whom committed to give aid in some sort. Some of that is humanitarian, although medical supplies are very much needed. And other countries have agreed that it should be lethal aid that is provided. The Ministry of Defence here in London will now look at how we coordinate the delivery of that. And as you'd appreciate, whereas a couple of weeks ago we were able to be pretty candid about what we were doing, and we were able to facilitate media coverage of the arrival of the NLAW anti-tank weapons, now a very different stage of operations, and there's a requirement for some operational security.
But what about the timescale on it, though? Because I guess people will be wondering, will this lethal aid be getting into the hands of Ukrainian soldiers in a matter of hours, days, or could it even be weeks?
Well, that's exactly what we're working on. We're going to get it to them as quickly as we can. Clearly, there are challenges around how you get it into Ukraine and then into the hands of those who are fighting on the front lines. And what you don't want to do is put a massive dump of Western arms somewhere in Ukraine, only for it to then get whacked by a Caliber missile or to be taken by advancing Russian forces. So we won't share with you, I'm afraid, the detail of exactly how we will do this, but I'm confident that we can get UK and other nations lethal and humanitarian aid into the hands of the Ukrainian armed forces.
And also, what is happening with the Russian side? Your colleague Ben Wallace yesterday was telling us about how they had failed in their day one objectives. There's some fear about what the Russians could turn to if they continue to not be as successful as they'd hope. Officials reported in the papers this morning saying they could turn to thermobaric weapons. Could you tell us about what you're expecting on that front? And also, could that extend even into chemical weapons, perhaps?
Well, look, first of all, it is still the case that they have not achieved their day one objectives. Kharkiv, Kherson, Chernihiv, Mariupol, Sumy, Metropol are all still in Ukrainian hands. That'll be a huge cause of concern for President Putin and those that surround him in the Kremlin. I think it points to the hubris that was in the Russian plan, and in all probability, the reality that he is being very, very, very badly advised on how this military operation should be prosecuted. Obviously, you're right that there is Russian doctrine of violent overmatch. And so, as brilliantly as the Ukrainians are resisting, and we will continue to support them in doing that, there is this growing danger that the frustration that Russia will be feeling is responded to with that sort of weapon system, thermobaric rather than chemical.
Yeah.
But that's not guaranteed. I mean, there is the Russians are not 12 feet tall. They are in the middle of combat operations that they hadn't expected to go like this. They will need to start considering how they will do all of the resupply of the troops that have been involved in a far more intense series of contacts than they were expecting. And that is going to be a real test for them over the next few days.
On the sanctions side of things, we've frozen the assets of President Putin and his foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. But beyond that, the sanctions list announced on Thursday on the UK side had 6 individuals and 5 companies named. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is reported to have told MPs that wider UK sanctions were being hampered by the threat of legal action by city firms who are being retained by some of these Russian oligarchs. Is that the problem holding up more sanctions? London-based city firms?
Well, where they're based is sort of irrelevant, but absolutely, these very wealthy individuals are well lawyered up, as people would say, and therefore there needs to be a lot of legal due diligence done before you launch the sanctions, because they will be challenged. That is frustrating. It's frustrating that lawyers, wherever they're based, make money out of defending oligarchs who are part of the Putin kleptocracy. But that is the way that the world is, and it just means government needs to get all of its detail done and get everything sort of properly locked down before sanctions are launched against these individuals.
It's just because we are still in the incredible situation, aren't we, that we haven't been able to impose sanctions on Russia's largest bank, Bank. Are you not tempted to just do it and see what happens? Take the risk of legal action?
Well, I mean, I have to be honest, those aren't necessarily conversations I've been in, so I can't tell you how tempted the Chancellor, the Foreign Secretary, the Business Secretary have been to just go for it. I know that the Chancellor, the Foreign Secretary, the Business Secretary and the Prime Minister are showing real leadership around Europe about how these sanctions should be done, what should be included in them. You've heard the Prime Minister be unequivocal in his view that other nations should agree with us over the SWIFT banking system. So I don't think there's any lack of appetite from anybody at the top of government to be doing this. But I think there is just the reality that, unfortunately, these things do get legal quite quickly, and getting all of that sorted is, I think, important. Because I think, in fairness, if we had done that, if we had just issued all the sanctions and then see what stuck, and it ended up with a whole load of legal cases and judicial reviews in which it all became unpicked, I think you would be asking us some pretty tough questions about why we hadn't got our detail right in the first place.
Just very finally, though, I want to ask a word about where this could go, and I guess also a question about the mind of President Putin. Ben Wallace, your colleague, called him Tonto, of course, the other day. Some people have compared him to Hitler. Mikhail Khodorkovsky is in the Times this morning saying he's a madman. And Marco Rubio, US Senator, part of the Intelligence Committee there, said overnight, "I wish I could share more, but for now I can say it's pretty obvious to many that something is off with Putin." What is your understanding, Minister, about how stable President Putin is at the moment as compared to previous years and previous conflicts?
So I think to ask me sort of relative to previous years is quite challenging. Like a lot of people that follow Putin, those around him, I was very struck by the deeply ideological, bordering on fanatical language that was in his speech the other day. I think that hints at an emotion, a fervour in his mind that is far, far more than we've ever seen before. And I think that should play on our calculations for how we seek to compete with him over the coming days, weeks, months, years. If he has got to that place where he is so full of his own hype and so convinced of his own cause that he's not making sound decisions, I think the Russian people will quickly start to spot that he is not acting in their interests. He is just basking in his own hubris. And that feels like a very dangerous place for a leader to be.
James Heappey, Armed Forces Minister, thanks very much for your time this morning.
Thank you.